So first of all, thank you for coming. I really appreciate this. And I always feel very at home and welcome to be here in the Boston area, although who knows where you all are. But so I'm going to go through a talk here that's really a snippet of each of about five or six different topics. And I'll introduce the concept as we go. And I can do this talk in as little as 45 minutes. Hopefully, we have a little more time than that because I don't like to rush too much. So let's see how it goes. You just keep me informed if you're having trouble understanding me, if I'm breaking up or anything like that. And one last warning, about once a week, my computer just shuts down. So if I disappear, I'll try to come back on my phone immediately as my computer starts back up. So it won't interfere too much with what's going on. Let's go right ahead and do it. I am really I'm worried always that when I share stuff, people think I'm giving them advice, but I am not. What I'm doing is I'm sharing some of the things I've experienced and some of the thinking that I've done. This particular talk is about the thinking that I was doing leading up to when we more or less originated the idea of mob programming, and which I'm now calling software teaming. So this slide from Peter Block kind of tells the story. Uh, Another's experiences can be useful to us, but we shouldn't take them as, rules or the way we should live our life or something we should absolutely do. A really quick introduction to mob programming is just, or software teaming, all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time in the same space and at the same computer. Working on the same thing is required if we're going to collaborate. Otherwise, we're not really collaborating. If we do it at the same time, it just makes it a whole lot easier. If we're in the same space, it makes it even easier. And that we're all looking at the same computer screen sort of proves when we're working together that we're working on the same thing instead of five separate screens. So that's the basics. A slight overarching concept is if we can gather together all the skills and knowledge that we need, we can work on everything from start to finish directly without any queuing or excess inventory. Everything we do can be done without the disruptions, the context switching, the multitasking that normally happens. We can answer all of our own questions. Things proceed rather directly. So that's probably enough of an inventory, but this of an introduction. This idea of queuing and inventory I cover in a whole nother talk if you ever want to hear that one. So it looks like this. This is pretty straightforward. It can also be done remotely. You can see here's four people working in, I think this was 2016. So this was way before the pandemic. It's been done remotely almost all along. But now we're on to some advanced ideas. What I'm sharing here is my gathering together of the thinking that I've been doing from the years kind of like 1990 to 2010, trying to figure out a lot of stuff about software development, managing businesses, and managing software development that I was experimenting with as well, mostly learning from reading books and talking with other people and experimenting on stuff. During that time period is when Agile became a thing. So this Agile was a big influence on me. So let's see what we can find. I started working at about age 12 or 13. And my very first job was watering plants in a plant nursery where they grew plants and sold plants in little cans, little containers. And my boss took me aside on the very first day, and he was an older guy, maybe 55, and I was 12 or 13 years old. And he said to me, "You have two responsibilities. Your first responsibility is to water the plants so that not only do you want to keep them alive, you want to provide the conditions where they can thrive." Now, that was an important thing. Here's an old guy, younger than I am now, but an old guy talking to a 13-year-old as if I was important. And he was telling me, your work is important. You got to learn about these plants. So he gave me a book, a pretty big book on essentially horticulture and the needs of different species of plants. He said each species needs, or each cultivar requires different watering needs, different sunlight, different all these conditions. So you got to learn about it. That's knowledge you need to get. So he's telling me, I'm expecting you to learn a lot. Then he said this, your second responsibility is to pay attention. Look for things that we could do better and then share them with me, and we'll find a way to take action. Well, he taught me that pretty quickly. Within the first week, I was finding things that we could improve on and taking it to him. He said, "Okay, what do you think we should do about it?" He would always ask for my ideas first. And if he thought my idea was good, then I would do his idea. So the thing is that this person understood something that's really important. Tiny improvements over time provide a compounding effect. This is the same thing as compound interest in our investments. Now I want to just check. You can see my screen, right? Is that okay? Okay. So this is a chart that I got from this book called Atomic Habits. I actually copied this right out of the book so I could show it here. This is showing that if we can get a 1% improvement every day in 1 year, we'll get a 3,778% improvement. If you could do this well with your investments, you would not be going to late night meetups on software development because you'd be retired, going around the world in your yacht or whatever it is rich people do. This is amazing. Can we really get this? Well, of course, I put it into Excel to prove to myself with 365 compounding incidents, we get that 37.78 times improvement. That's a huge improvement. Can we get that? Well, I think Mr. Smith understood we might not be able to get that every day, but if we're constantly trying to improve, this can be a big advantage over time. So I think this whole talk is really about let's have a tiny improvements habit. The issue is, and I'd like to just say the end, because that's enough. But I learned this as a 12 or 13-year-old kid, but as I went through my life, I kind of forgot it over and over again. I owned a number of small businesses in my life, and I ran into the same problems over and over with maybe misunderstanding the way things really are. And it finally occurred to me what Mr. Smith was doing. That was the name of the guy who owned the nursery where I worked. That he had understood that this tiny improvements habit is really important. So I started doing that again in about 1990 or so in a business that I owned. I found myself I hear a little sound. I'm going to try muting someone. Okay, there we go. Uh, I found out after a while in the 90s that I was spending too much time managing things, and I started realizing maybe there's a better path. And I remembered Mr. Smith at the nursery. Mr. Smith was a very straightforward person, well loved in his community, who had a very effective small business. And as I thought about the way he did things, I started trying to incorporate those into my way of working. I had a small business with about 15 employees, and I spent too much time managing things. So that's sort of what the rest of this is about. It's not as simple as it seems. It's actually very, very difficult to achieve. So we're going to explore why it's difficult to get these tiny improvements and then some of the things I've done about it. So I'm going to do this at a pretty fast pace. If you have any questions, it's probably best if you hold them until the end, then we can maybe have a question and answer period. So let's take a look at this. I usually do this as an exercise. And I have a photograph, I think, in here that's actually from doing this exercise in Boston once, 10 years ago. Here's the thing. I asked this question. What, in the last few months or so, what has gotten in your way of allowing you to become effective in your work? So if you don't mind just throwing into the chat, what things make it difficult for you to be effective in your work in your normal workplace? What are those things? Maybe come up with an idea or two, or whoever feels like, hopefully everyone has access to the chat. You can just pop a couple things in there. So interruptions in work. Everybody should have free work. Oh, I like that. Let's go on. Meetings. That's the most common one I hear. Reprioritizations, lack of direction. I love this. Let's get a few more. I'm activating your brains, right? It's late in the day, but try to add a couple more. Thanks for sharing these. Um, oh, being on phone hold. I experienced that today talking with my bank. More meetings. Focus on non-priority. No one is talking. Oh, interesting. Doing too many things at the same time. That's multitasking. Ambiguity. Okay. Fixing what isn't broken. I love this. Well, here's what I'm going to show you. This was Vistaprint. You all remember Vistaprint probably. This was doing the same exercise at them. 20 people in 3 minutes came up with 50 items. Here's the list that they had. Some of the things that you had there. Multitasking, waiting on dependencies, indecision, distractions, workflow interruptions, meetings, unclear requirements, unclear expectations. Snow days. Yes, that's a Boston thing, isn't it? They told me that some days they can't get to work. That was before we were doing a lot of remote work. You get the picture. This definitely was in Boston. Here's the thing. I have done this exercise now at about 1,000 companies, maybe well over 500, and maybe in 1,000 different presentations. And I get a similar list everywhere I go. And when I'm asking them, I want to know, you notice how I phrased it, over the last few months, this is the current problems you're having. And this is what I found. There are many of these problems. They stay with us year after year, and they're everywhere I go. And the question I want to ask is, why are they so profuse? Why are they so persistent? Why are they so pervasive? Well, at first, this was just an exploration, because the first time I did this exercise was probably at an open space, or maybe even before that, maybe as early as 2002 or something at some company. Like, why do these stick with us so many years? And this is one of the things I noticed. I was working at a place in 1999 where we would do our work and then we would do a lessons learned, or what we nowadays would call a retrospective. And they found they had some big problems. So they determined how they would fix their problems. And then we'd go back to work. So we would actually get some training, or we would practice the things we're trying to get better at. And we'd go back to work. Well, after the next retrospective, we found the same problems. And we've tried to solve them in a similar way. And this just keeps happening over and over. After 4 or 5 months at this particular company, I stood up and I made an observation. This is just going on over and over again, and we're not getting the improvements that we want to get. So what's going on for us? If this just goes on over and over again, and in those days, some of you will remember in 1999, there was a big patterns movement in software. Everybody was naming the patterns that they saw. And the pattern I saw here, I called the cycle of continuous no improvements. Now, that is a troubling thing. If we're having the same problems over and over and you're trying to fix them and they're not getting improved, what are we going to do about this? So here's the thing. Because I was already not a young guy, I think I was probably 45 years old at the time. I'd seen this before. And I said, I think I see a pattern here, and I think this is the problem. We're dealing with symptoms. We haven't even identified the problem. I suspect all of these things are symptoms of some other problem. Why are we having meetings? Why are there scarce materials? Why are there technical blockers, analysis paralysis, and on and on? There's something underlying these things. And that really has been a driving force for me for quite a while. But the thing is, you can't solve symptoms. Symptoms aren't something you can solve. Symptoms are something you can deal with. And if you do, you might hide the real problem. If I have a cold and I have a headache, I'm congested, I maybe have a sore throat and I'm coughing, well, I can take a pain reliever for my head. I can take a decongestant. I can take a cough suppressant. I'm not getting rid of the cold. I'm just getting rid of the symptoms of the cold. It hides that I have a cold. And that's not a good thing to hide if you have a cold, because then you feel like going out and spreading it to everybody. Interesting stuff. So I think there's a bigger problem. This is actually kind of what I call, well, one of the things I call the problem with problems. In some domains, we can't solve problems. We think we can, and we set out to solve them, but today's solution just becomes tomorrow's problem. And when that happens for us, we might not realize we've just morphed our problem from one form into another. We've just switched the problem into something that looks different. We think we're solving the problems. If this is true, what are we going to do about it? And again, that's the problem with problems. So this is one of the things that makes it difficult to get the tiny improvements. Things can be hard to manage because we focus on solving problems. And this comes to what I call the misplaced focus of management. Now, I've seen this over and over. I've managed a lot of businesses of my own and for other people. And I've worked as a manager in some firms. And I see this over and over again. Management is focused on solving problems. That's how we get evaluated in our work a lot of the time. When we're out setting out to solve problems, we're just looking for problems. And one problem is things are hard to manage. So how do we solve for that? We think we need to solve for it anyways. So we think, let's make it easy to manage things. And I think this is problematic because what this, I think, tends to do is, well, based on this quote from Peter Drucker, it's actually probably not from Peter Drucker, but so much of what we call management consists in making it difficult for people to work. Well, that's a problem because it will actually get harder to manage. The more we try to make it easy to manage, the more difficult it becomes for people to do the work, and therefore things become more difficult to manage. It's a catch-22 that many companies find themselves mired in. Okay, so why do we let this happen? Well, this is the next thing I want to cover, is we have our beliefs of the way things are, and we have our biases that cement in our beliefs so that we're really stuck with them. And I don't know if I have even a solution for this. Here's the thing. Beliefs are a natural thing for humans. We need to have beliefs. A belief, I'm going to share my one thinking about beliefs that comes from Dave Gray. You might know of him from his book, Game Storming, but this is a really good book. And I got this drawing from, I think, before his book. This was some notes he was sharing online. Reality is everything there is. We can't be exposed to reality, but we can experience some part of reality. And in experiencing that, we can pay attention to a very small amount of it. Matter of fact, in this talk today, science proves, I think, that you can hear or you will be able to pay attention to about 10% of what I share with you today. That's not very much. So on this small thread of attention, we build our theories, our judgments, our beliefs, and that becomes what's obvious to us. But that's an individual thing. And it's all based, these important things are based on a very tiny thread of attention. And that becomes my truth. So things are hard to manage because what we believe is based on that thin thread. So what do we do about this? So this obvious is needed. We would, according to Kahneman in the book Thinking Fast and Slow, we would use up all of our energy making decisions if we didn't have beliefs that let us make decisions really quickly. So we'll deal with this later, but the beliefs are necessary, but they can also limit us. And I will share a limiting belief in just a couple minutes to give you an example. The issue here for me is that couple this with our biases and we're really in trouble. Now, I found this diagram at Wikipedia, I guess. This shows about, I don't know, a couple hundred, a whole bunch of biases that are grouped into subcategories and categories. And there's a lot to study here. I'm only going to talk about one of them. But each one of these, if we looked at them, we're going to find we're guilty, all of us, including me, of a lot of these. Being aware is an important starting spot, but we need to mind the biases. So I'm going to only talk about confirmation bias. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. But the idea that we're biased toward confirming our existing beliefs. Whatever it is we believe, we don't want to have that belief broken. So we fall into the trap of confirmation bias. It comes in several forms, but it means when we're looking for information, we're going to have a biased search for information. We'll never be able to find the info that would counter what we want to believe or what we already believe. We will then filter based whatever we find based on our biases, and we will have an interpretation that will suit what we want it to say. I've read some studies that show if you take two papers, give it to two different people with two different mindsets, they will find in the same paper being read by two people proof of whatever it is they believe, even though they're contradictory beliefs. The same paper, the same data, they will say proves that they're correct. And then we will have a biased memory. We will remember the things that we do biased towards what we want to believe. So this is really problematic. There is another kind of bias. I think it's called desirability bias, which I think is equally difficult. We so much want something to be true that we start having a bias search to prove to ourselves it's true. And I'm just as guilty of this as anyone else. So there's nothing special about me. So things are hard to manage because it's human nature for us to confirm our belief in what we already believe, or perhaps to confirm our belief in what we want to be true. This really limits us. And we see this in everyday life, but I see it in businesses everywhere. So I'm going to give you that example of a limiting belief. We often believe we succeeded because we did things the right way. We were good at what we were doing. It was our talent and our training and our capability and our good brains that solved the problem we were trying to solve. Kahneman tells us it's not so true. Now, this is a very condensed. Oh, my grandson's here. I just got to say hi. Hi, how you doing? We'll see you in a little bit. All right. So, this is what he says. Success is talent plus luck. That makes some kind of sense. We have to have some kind of capability, and we're going to have some luck. Great success is a little more talent and a lot more luck. So we trick ourselves into thinking it's because of us that the great things are happening, and it might be in spite of us. So things can be very hard to manage, and it's hard to get that tiny improvements because we think what we're doing is the right thing. It's more about our own success, but it's more about randomness. This is troubling. This is a problem. So we think that we succeeded. We want to believe that it's because we did things the right way. Even worse, that's at least the story we tell others. So this is it. We just need to keep doing what we're doing to succeed. One of the things I've heard said is what got us here won't get us there. And that's sort of part of this problem. Okay, so Brian's first law really puts this. When I first read this, I go, geez, I wish I knew this earlier. I kind of love this little combination of things here. Whoops, I clicked too many times. At some time in the life cycle of virtually every organization, its ability to succeed in spite of itself runs out. That's because you can be successful with a very low level of capability in most businesses. It's a lot easier than we think, and certainly in software development. But eventually things clog up, the bureaucracy and everything else, and the company starts not doing so well. We start trying to protect the income we have, and we're trying to be risk averse, and all of a sudden we're not getting anywhere. So I love that law. So I'm going to move to a slightly different topic. This is the failure to communicate. So I got this originally from a paper by a guy named Zuill. I don't even know how to say his name, but he's from Finland. He was a professor in Finland, and he wrote these things he calls Zuill's laws. And all I'm asking is, you don't need to take these as truths. Just understand what if these are true, okay? For Zuill's fundamental law, communication usually fails except by accident. Now, what would you do? How would you behave if that was a truth? We got to rethink the way we do things if that's a truth. Okay. I love this one. If communication can fail, it will. If communication cannot fail, it still most usually fails. I was in a company meeting that was really important about 20 years ago. And they gathered everybody in a big room so they could make a very important announcement. And I noticed as we were leaving that everybody I talked with had a different interpretation of what was said. Now, I won't go into any details, but what I heard the guy to be saying was, we're going to go through some hard times and some of you are going to lose your job. That was the message I heard. And some people heard, we're moving to the new project. So it's like, no, none of us really understood what the person was saying. So if this was true, what are we going to do about it? Let's go on. He's got 4 or 5 more I'm going to share. If communication seems to succeed in the intended way, there's a misunderstanding. Think about that for a moment. This next one is a companion to that. If we are content with our message, communication certainly has failed. I could ask you right now, do you understand? And you could nod your head, say, yes, I do. I have no way of knowing you understood anything. All you know is you have an understanding, but it may not be what I was intending to share. This is problematic. Let's see just two more, or maybe three more. If a message can be interpreted in several ways, it'll be interpreted in a manner that maximizes the damage. We will find the worst interpretation, and that's what the other person will get. I remember my dad used to say stuff like, go rake the leaves. So I'd go out there and kind of haphazardly rake the leaves around. And then he would come and say, no, you gotta rake them into a pile and put them in the trash bin. And I said, you didn't say to do that. You said to rake the leaves. And he would say, do what I meant, not what I said. I think that's a brilliant little saying. But anyways, this is problematic. This happens in Twitter or other social media all the time. This one's even better. There's always someone who knows better than you what you meant with your message. That's like Twitter, completely. Of course, they don't call it Twitter anymore, but we won't get into that right now. Brilliant stuff. Okay, so this is part of Wheel's law is going on here. We've got that little tiny thread of attention, and this is the problem. This means that I'm going to have my truth and you're going to have your truth. Because even if we are looking at the same reality, we're having different experiences. A different part of it's getting into our brain, and we're going to judge our view of the world. You know that old tale about the blind man finding an elephant, and each one has a different interpretation of what the elephant is. Okay, so this is the same basic thing. We're looking at the same stuff, but we're not going to have the same interpretation of it. Okay, let's move on. I want to cover two or three more things, then we'll get to the practical stuff. So the first thing is I want to talk about systems and then domains. You probably all know about these things, but a quick definition of a system, I put this together myself based on what I think is a good definition. So I shortened other people's definitions. A system is an interconnected and interacting set of elements that achieve something. So what do we even mean by achieve? But we can think about the food chain is a kind of a system, or the ecosystem, or we could think about a weather system. These things interact with each other, and it ends up with some kind of a thing happening. That's what a system is, kind of. So I love this I probably shouldn't put this in the talk, but I love this from attributed to Arthur Jones. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. That's another way of saying we can't really design a system. It's going to do whatever it does, and that's going to show what our design was. It's not what we started with thinking it would do. It's going to be whatever it does it actually do. And that's what the system is, in quotes, designed to do. So I want to give a couple other thoughts about systems. Donella Meadows talks about systems within systems. Systems can be nested within other systems. These are interacting with each other, and it can be cross purposes, purposes within purposes. So if we look at it this way, the work itself could be a system. I'm going to make a sandwich. This defined system of work might be a list of how I would go about making a sandwich, or a set of instructions. Outside that might be, if we have a business, some system of management where people are making sandwiches. And outside that might be a system of purpose, like why do we have a business making sandwiches? So all of these things interact, they're systems within systems. But the reason I'm sharing this is most symptoms, wherever we see them manifest themselves, is not the place we can work on them, because you can't work on a problem from within the thing. I like to share it kind of this way. I like having an opposable thumb. Some of you probably have opposable thumbs too. What I was thinking was I'd love to have two opposable thumbs. It would look like this, right? I'd like to have two opposable thumbs on each hand. Can I get that? Can I change the system that made my body? I'm not in charge of that. evolution could do that maybe someday, if there was ever some reason for that to occur, or some adaptation that happens accidentally. That's really what all it ever is. So wherever a problem exists, we can't solve it there. We have to move out to the outer system, but it might mean we have to move out several systems. Most of the time, when we see a symptom, we don't even know what the problem is, and we cannot solve it in the location where it is occurring. So we have to keep moving out, and we may never find where we can really fix it. I'll tell you how I deal with that later. Not that I have any secrets. The thing, though, is that we might only be seeing symptoms at every layer. We may not yet gotten to the problem. This is related to maybe the thing like 5 whys, but there's a lot more to it than that. Let's keep moving ahead here, though. There's another problem. Well, of course, things are hard to manage because often we don't even think about where the problem really is located. We just deal with the symptoms underneath. So we don't know where it can be addressed. We don't know where the problem really lies, and we don't know where it can be addressed. But it goes further than this. There are other systems around us that we're not necessarily contained within, that have nothing to do with our work. They are just the system, like the system of the general world around us, the health of the organization, the health of the community, the health of the world, and other things that might be interfering. If you're in a country where there's a war or something going on, all these things are completely outside of our world of the nice little systems we think we own. So again, this can make things very difficult. One more thing about systems, then we'll talk about domains. I love this quote from John Gall. This really focuses it for me. A working complex system invariably evolved from a working simple system. He goes on to say that means that we cannot create a working complex system. We can potentially create some small systems, working small systems, because most small systems don't work. These little adaptations don't do anything. So this is problematic. We think we can invent a working complex system. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. Another problem with this that Donella Meadows brings forward is an important factor of a system is it will perpetuate itself. The reason that the ecosystem is what it is because it's been able to perpetuate itself. This goes for almost everything. If this is true, we really have a problem. Donella Meadows goes on to say that we can at best temporarily affect a system, but it probably won't end up doing what we wanted it to do. This is problematic as well. Put all this stuff together, and we're back to this thing from Arthur Jones. The system does what it does, and it's designed for that, but we're not in charge of that design. If we believe we are, we're going to try to affect that design. We're never going to get the results we want. Almost anything we do to constrain the design of the system will not give the results we were hoping for. And if it does, it will be tricking us. We will think we got what we wanted. It will come back later to be something we actually didn't understand. So things are hard to manage because of this perpetuation of the system. Also, it does this by evolving. We can't intervene. We can't transform it. We can't do adoptions, and it won't change as we like. Now, is this true in everything we do? No. This is about complex systems, like working with people. That's what we're talking about here. Okay. So I want to get to the domain so we understand that part a little bit better. Most of you have probably heard talks about Cynefin, and I love Cynefin, but I want to make a quick definition of Cynefin. So it's got these quadrants. So they're not really quadrants. They're called domains. If you call them quadrants to anybody who really is into Cynefin, they'll tell you you're wrong. But they look like quadrants, but they're not. So these are different domains. These 4 domains, clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic, have different attributes to them. And I'm going to explain that by I think this is a good enough example. I can buy a can of dough and I can make some biscuits. All I have to do is follow the instructions. That's the clear space. There's no ambiguity. You heat the oven to 350. When it hits 350, you put these biscuits that you get out of the can, you put them on a tray, you put them in, you time it for 15 minutes, and then you start watching. As soon as they turn golden brown, You take them out of the oven and your family is happy with how good you made the biscuits. But if you want really great biscuits, we're moving into a more complex, complicated space. In the complicated space, so I got to say here, there are no unknowns in the clear space. We know, we just follow the instructions. You go in to buy a bottle of milk. You don't ask the person, how long will it take to get milk? You just walk over to the corner where they have the milk and you get it. You don't ask, can you estimate the cost? The cost is printed on it or it's on the shelf. That's the clear space. When we move into the complicated space, there are unknowns, but we know what they are. I used to have a screen printing shop where we made signage. We identified 47 variables that could cause problems with printing with the screen printing system. Any problem we had would be one of or a combination of those 47 variables. We know all the unknowns. So if a problem happens, if we're really experienced, we know what the problem is, or we could get out the list and look at the different pictures and decide what problem we have and fix it. This is the complicated space. However, we can move into the complex space and it's more like this. Well, I should say this. These are tasty croissants made by a real chef, a chef who knows how to do baking and all the steps to make croissants. You can buy croissant dough in a can and it's not going to make very good croissants. With this system, you can make okay croissants, but it takes a real baker to make great croissants. And they have to take care of a lot of variables. Is the humidity today the same as yesterday? Is the oven heating up evenly? Is the flour ground to the same consistency? Are the eggs the same size? They have a lot to figure out, but they know how to adjust for it. They pay a lot of attention and they use their expertise. When we move into the complex space, this is molecular gastronomy. You're trying to invent new flavors and new textures and new experiences. There's no recipe to follow. Your expertise is going to be in something completely different than the making of this specific item. And you might start out with something, you think you want to make a new gravy, and you end up inventing a new dessert. Because as you taste things as they go, you're going to discover the things. This is molecular gastronomy, a process of discovery. You don't know what you don't know. You're going to go about trying to discover it. The last domain is chaotic, or the chaos domain. This is how I cook. When I cook the cheap biscuits that come in the can, I put them in the oven, and then I forget I've got something in the oven. I'm in the other room programming something or whatever. And all of a sudden I smell that I have a problem. When I go back in the other room, it kind of looks like this, right? So you don't stop. And then when this is happening, you don't stop and go, let's talk about how to keep that from happening next time. You're not going to stop and think. You're going to take action immediately. In my case, I keep a wet towel next to the oven whenever I'm cooking because I know I'm going to burn something eventually. So I'm going to throw the towel over. You use your fluency, you plan ahead, but you can't deal with all emergencies. You act on what you know, and then you decide what to do next time. Okay, with me, my food ends up looking like this, and the family knows whenever I'm cooking, that means we're probably going to go out for dinner later because I'm going to burn it or ruin it somehow. Okay, so this is the issue with this. The tactics and techniques will vary from domain to domain. You cannot use things that you would do in the clear space in the complicated space, or in the complex space that you use in the complicated space. You can't mix and mash them back and forth. They're going to be specific to what you're doing. So things are hard to manage because we often don't understand the domain of the problem, or we don't even understand that there's domains at all, and that all the techniques are not suitable in all the domains. So this is the reason I'm sharing this stuff, is to get to this practical things. So we have learned these little bits, and I think we got plenty of time to finish this out nicely. Have I been going too fast? Is this working okay for you folks? I know it's getting late. Another question I would have to ask is, are you getting too depressed now? Like, this guy's just painting a dark picture and we'll never get out of this. So this is, I think this can be dealt with. I have confidence this can be dealt with. Well, that's the world that we live in. We live in this unknown world where we don't understand everything. And humans have known this forever. I've got books here from Greek authors who pretty much already understood this stuff 2 or 3 thousand years ago. Okay, so like nothing's new, right? Okay. I'm going to cover some practical stuff. There's kind of a warning, don't try this at home, but I'm going to be sharing the ideas that I was using back in the years from 2005 to 2010 as I had generated these things that I was trying to learn how to grapple with management of software development, and I was a programmer myself, and the organizations I was working within. How can we make things better? And these are the things I want to share, the topics of turn up the good, working smarter, make it easy, the bubble, collaboration rather than communication, and leading from within. I'm going to cover a little bit of each one of these. This is material that I'm trying to use in some of my workshops that can take a whole day to cover. So, or even 3 days. So I'm condensing this a great deal. The first thing I want to share is turn up the good. I learned this basic concept from Mr. Smith at the nursery, and I relearned it several times over the years. But with the idea of turn up the good, we look for the things that are going well, and how do we get more of that? It's a very simple approach, and I'm going to explain how this comes into the difference between this and problem solving. But I like the way that Kent Beck defined this. Some of you probably know Kent Beck, but this is a very useful thing to me. So Kent Beck talked about in his book, Mob Programming Explained. I've got 2 copies of it here. Extreme Programming Explained. This is the original, what they call the white book. There's also a version that they call the green book. But in this one, he actually says what I'm going to quote you here. When I first articulated extreme programming, I had the mental image of knobs on a control board. That's a control board. Okay, you can see all the knobs on there. They adjust the volume, they adjust different aspects of the volume and other things as well. Okay, he thought that each knob is a practice that from experience I knew worked well. That means he understood that these things are good. What if I could turn all of those up to 10? Let's see what happens. We're going to do some experiments. So he has the experience, knowing these things are good. That's practical contact with and observation of facts or events. He knew test-driven development was working. He knew pair programming was working. He took all the practices they had. What's working for us? What's good about it? And that's the reflection. What's the value here? Is there anything meaningful about this? And then the experiments. What can we do to turn it up? What can we try to do to get more out of this? So this is the turn up the good idea. And I think this is very, very important. Because remember what I said earlier, sometimes in trying to solve a problem, we just invent the next problem. So rather than looking for the problems and trying to solve them, or in addition to looking for the problems and trying to solve them, let's also look for the things that are going well and find a way to get even more of that. That's pretty important. Now, I want to share something from Russell Acuff. I still am internalizing this. I don't know if I can explain it well, but he uses these 4 terms: absolution, resolution, dissolution, to define different ways of solving problems. Absolve it means you pretty much hope it will go away, right? That's sort of absolving it. Resolving it means you actually try to deal with the problem. And I think that we end up with something that's good enough, but I think this is really usually the dealing with the symptoms. The problem, we don't see it anymore, so things are okay. Then he's got this concept of actually solving it. That means we're going to find the problem and we're going to fix it. Now, if that's a thing like in a complicated domain, it could mean the brakes on my car don't seem to be working well. It could be there's a leak. It could be something's broken. It could be the brake pads are getting worn out. So we know all the unknowns. We can solve the problem. In that domain, it's easy to solve problems. But now the last one he has is to dissolve it. Now, I'm not sure this can really be done, but Russell Acuff's a much more brilliant person than I am. He says we eliminate it by redesigning the system that has it. But if you remember what I said earlier, that's going to backfire on us too. And he's a system thinker, so he knows some things I don't know. but let's see what I've come up with this. I think there's another way to do it. Originally, I called it to evaporate. That's what the turn up the good is. Because what I noticed was a lot of problems disappeared when we didn't work on those problems, but we just turned up the good on the things that were going well. Somebody told me, I was giving this talk somewhere, and they said, hey, maybe you could call it pre-solution. So I looked up pre-solution in the dictionary, at least at that time, a year or two ago, and I couldn't find it anywhere. We can't know what problem we've solved because we never end up having it. But some of the things might fade away just because we turn up the good, for example, on collaboration. We'll talk about that in a moment. So I think all of these things we talked about earlier are symptoms. Whatever their underlying problems are, I think faded away when we started working well as a team. This is really an important aspect of software teaming or mob programming to me, is the idea that turning up the good on collaboration made a lot of what we thought were problems to fade away. And so the end result for me and the bigger idea is if we have all of these things in a space and we start turning up the good on collaboration, those things might fade away. And most of them did for us. Now, I don't have any guarantee that that's what's happening, but that's what happened for us. And I've experienced this over and over again in different ways with different things. So I think it's valid. Okay, let's go on because I want to get all the way to the end. That's the power of turning up the good, but there's a kind of a caveat. We get good things we have no way of knowing actually exist. We don't yet know what they will be if we keep turning up the good on the things that are good. This is harnessing the power of serendipity. What if good things are happening and we're not noticing them, we may never think of turning them up. So we get a habit of looking for the things that are good so we can reflect on them and decide, can we try to turn it up? Turning it up doesn't mean we'll get more good. It's just something to try. Okay, there is the caveat. We don't know where this will lead. We cannot know the path we're going to go down. This is sort of the difference, between an explorer and somebody that's driving down a highway that's been driven on millions of times. The explorer doesn't really know where we're going to end up. This is sort of the thing. So this is about the tiny improvements habit. I think that's one of the things I learned when I was 13, and I didn't really internalize till many, many years later. So I want to talk about working smarter, which is closely related. And I got this out of a paper about 20 years ago from a couple people at MIT, creating and sustaining process improvement. Nobody ever gets credit for fixing problems that never happened. This is problematic because we usually get incentivized or get raises because we solved a big problem. But in this way, problems don't happen. So I'm not going to go into all the details of it. It's a paper you can get online for free, and I highly recommend reading it. Sturman and Repenning from MIT. Working harder means you will have less time to improve your capabilities. Working smarter means you're going to take more time to improve your capabilities. So the amount of effort that you put into something, in this case, we're putting a lot of time working on it, we're putting in less time working on it, times our capability will be our actual performance. What happens over time is performance degrades. The harder we work, the less we improve. And over time, and I don't think it flattens out like this, our working smarter, we keep improving our capability. We get more and more done. And Sturman and Repenning in their paper basically say this: we should be spending more time increasing our capability rather than doing the work. That means if we're spending an hour a day improving our capability and the rest of the time doing our work, that we're not doing enough. I think this is good advice. I've tried to implement this, and the closest I've got is 8 hours a week of studying together as a team, working hard to improve our capabilities. So back to that, it's the small improvements habit. This is the same thing. That's why I said at the beginning that I just want to internalize that. That's what's important. Next thing I want to talk about is to make it easy. If you remember earlier, we talked about the misplaced focus of management. The management wants to make it easy to manage things, but that backfires on us. It actually will make it harder to manage things. We implement bug tracking systems. We implement organizational applications, things where we put all the requirements into this one app. We have backlogs. We have all kinds of things that are management systems to try to guide us to do our work. They will all backfire on us because it's just going to make it harder for people to do their work. So what are we going to do about it? Well, this is pretty straightforward. Make it as easy as possible for everyone to do the best they can do. We're not really ever going to get much more than that. We'll never get perfection. I like to think of it this way. If we prioritize for the flow of the work rather than the output of the individual, we will get some huge benefits. Not trying to get the most out of each person, trying to get the best from each person into everything we do. This is a powerful thing. There's a saying I read recently that, again, this is about the tiny improvements habit, but that, I think I made a slide today, so I'm going to show it in just a moment. Well, I might get to it in a moment. So if I don't, I'll try to remember. But I want to talk about the bubble. So remember, we have the problem of the systems and the domains. The big problem with the systems is it's hard to change a system. It's really impossible. The system will resist the change. So is it hopeless? Maybe it is, but I don't think it is. What I've attempted to do and what I was doing in the late, the first decade, 2008, 9, 10, I was trying to figure out how to get isolated spaces where we could experiment with new, better ways of working, but without having it interfere with the rest of the organization that would stop that change from happening, because the organization is going to try to perpetuate itself. Any attempt we make it change will probably make a change, but it won't be the change we wanted. So I saw Michael Sahota write about this in 2013, and I got this drawing from him. This is what I was attempting to do, is to have a space where we could experiment with improving the way we worked without interference from the rest of the company. So we needed adapters that would allow the rest of the company to act with us as if we were still doing things the way they expected to be done, but we'd be experimenting with new things. And so this, I was hoping we could grow up and down the organization a little bit, and also side to side, that we could see others starting to adopt these ideas and think about how to make their own bubble and experiment with better ways of working. The turn up the good idea, for example. As this grows, my hope was my whole department where I'd been hired would grow into this more advanced, what I would consider way of operating, and that this would spread across the company into other areas, eventually being in almost every little nook and cranny across the company, eventually taking over the old structure with some new things that we don't know what they will be. But I kind of had confidence they would be better. I don't have enough of a life to experiment this in any academic manner. It's just a theory, but that's what I was attempting to do. Okay, so let's go on a little bit. Hopefully, as sooner or later, everybody would see the benefits. Maybe not. Okay. You can think of it like Swiss cheese. If you buy Swiss cheese that just has a few bubbles, it's mostly cheese. What if you bought Swiss cheese that was mostly bubbles? There wouldn't be a lot of cheese. So the old system's fading away. What if you eventually got it where there was all bubbles? The old organization would be gone. I don't know if the new one would be any better, but that was my theory that I was attempting to live out. So if we can at least introduce the chance for small systems to start and to give them the space to evolve, there's a chance we will get something good out of that. Ed Catmull from Pixar used to say, we have to protect the new ideas from people who don't realize that there's going to be some ungreatness before we get the greatness. That's what this is about. Okay, so we need to allow those things to evolve. We got to protect the bubble from the bubble will be destroyed. The outside system will crush it. Okay, so one or two more things. Collaborate rather than communicate. And we're almost done. We're almost out of the hour. Hopefully there'll be time for questions. I'm going to cover this super quick. Remember Wheel's Law? What if it's true? What are we going to do about it? And this is my suggestion. Let's just cram these two things together, that right now we have the same reality, but different experiences. If we bring it together, now it's two people having the same experience, and we have twice the attention on it. Still thin threads. If we add a few more people to a reasonable sized team, we have a lot more views on the reality through our experience. This grows into even a bolder attention because we start sharing what we're learning. And this is what mob programming, I believe, brought us. By being by working as a team, we were getting more perspectives on the same experience. Our truth, well, that's what this is about. Our truth was growing. We started out with my truth and your truth, it became our truth. So this was an important thing. I believe that rather than trying to communicate, let's get good at collaboration, and the communication will happen that needs to be made. So again, the tiny improvements habit, one last bit, leading from within. So there is no hero coming to save us. It's up to you to make the improvements in your space. So you got to take responsibility. It's what I've attempted to do, and I've had only some minor success. But that's, in my opinion, there's nobody coming to fix these things for us. We need to be our own hero. We can work in a sustained way by contributing, paying enough attention to contribute the right thing at the right time and in the right way. I was always looking for the opportunity to get the next little improvement, somebody else who's ready to start thinking in this way. And then I read a book called the the Friction Project, and this is what they said. So I just added this today. Make the right things easier and the wrong things harder. Now, I haven't really put that to use yet. I'm trying to figure out, have I, and what is this about? So this is something I'm trying to internalize right now. I kind of like this idea. My idea has always been make it easy. This is sort of a little more bold step. Make it easy to do the right things, harder to do the wrong things. Like, to have a system crash because it was too easy to do the wrong thing. We're kind of at the end, just enough, not too little, not too much, barely sufficient. That has worked for me pretty well. Okay, we're at the end. This is it. This last slide, and we're right on time almost. This last slide is important to me because I was shared this in my 20s. Mr. Smith was when I was in my early teens, but a fellow named Donald Fast shared this with me when I was about 27 or 28, and it's really made a difference for me. I was trying to be a sign painter at the time, and he did really elegant lettering. His lettering was just very beautiful scripts, very elegant. And I want to learn to do that. So I found his phone number and I called him up and I said, Mr. Fast, could you teach me how to make this beautiful lettering that you're making? He said, well, I can show you how to do it, but that's not going to help you. I have something that will be much more useful. So please I'll come on down and I'll share that with you. And this is what he shared. It's not about learning the techniques. It's about creating an environment where this great things will happen. That's really what he's saying here. If you have the right environment, you will do the practice. You will, and I'm going to make it very clear. He said the brush that you're using will create those letters if you allow it to make the shapes it's good at. You just need to get out of its way. That means you need to learn how to hold it. You need to learn how to let it do what those hairs on that brush will do. He said each brush will be different. So you have to learn what are the strokes this brush can make. And once you learn that, you can then make the elegant letters this brush was meant to make. Now, he took a little more Zen than that, but that's pretty much on the edge of being Zen, right? I think we're at the end because thank you. The end. Okay. So there we are. I guess if we have time, I'm willing to take a question or two. I hope I sparked some thinking for you that could be useful. I'm really not here to tell you what to do. This was more about my journey, and I had enough failures in everything I did to learn a few lessons along the way.
That was so great, Woody. It really some great um, some great themes some great themes there, and I thought they were all very well
Yeah.
related to each other and
Thank you.
built upon each other.
So
So
there's a lot to think about there, but I
yeah,
should have shared all the artwork in my talks that comes from my wife, Andrea. So you'll see her names on these things. So I don't want to leave that out.
yeah, just I'm really enjoying the artwork too. It's really you can
That's
tell it's
that's the important part.
it's come from a place of a place of enjoyment, a place of I can tell she really enjoys doing that because
Yes,
it just comes
yes,
through. So seems like she's found her space where she can build on the focus on the good and build on that. So
yes.
that's a lesson within a lesson there for us. Who's got questions? There's been some great we've been commenting back and forth in the chat um, while Woody was speaking, but I wanted to give anybody an opportunity to come off mic if they wanted to speak and share their impressions with or ask any questions. Don't be shy.
Well, as we wait for that, I'm going to do an advertisement. This is my wife's books, and
Nice.
today, this book just got released. No, it will be released on April 9th, next week. So that's her
Oh,
latest book that
Doc
was written by
versus
Nellie Boucher, Dog versus Strawberry.
love it.
It's just kind
So
of a story of a dog with the zoomies. But anyways, I'm open to questions.
So if we search on Andrea, we'll get
Yeah.
that.
So there's about she has I think 11 or 12 books now, but anyways, I'm happy to answer any questions or hear any comments. Maybe you have some suggestions for me.
Can you go back to your comment a few slides back? I was trying to write it down. Um, instead of improving collaboration,
Yes, yes. Rather than trying to get better at communication, let's figure out how to turn up the good on collaboration.
uh,
I'm still trying to find the right saying to use for this. I try to come up with sayings, but the basic concept here is when we were collaborating better and better, we almost automatically became better communicators. And in my workshop, what I try to show is that if we collaborate well, we have a very short feedback loop where we're actually doing the thing that we're trying to communicate about. That means we need to be doing the work that we're trying to communicate about, and that's when communication really happens. David, you did that answer that for you? Did you want that's what you wanted to see?
Oh, I
yes.
do.
Okay. And then David's got a question.
Yeah. Uh, Getting back to mob programming, there's something that I've always wondered about. I'll ask a question, you can answer it directly or say what within your talk would help to address
Sure,
my
sure.
concern. And I see mob programming, everybody's gathered uh, around the machine and suggesting, I would say inevitably, there's somebody who can't, everything's going which way, and somebody temporarily loses the path and is just standing there and doesn't know how to keep it going and feels like a loose log and wasting their time until they're lucky enough to catch the thread again. A, is that a concern that you've seen? And B, to the extent it is, how would your talk help to eliminate the poor member of the mob who seems to be frozen out?
So
You know,
I think I can address that.
okay,
If you feel you are contributing something, you're going to be part of this team. If you feel you can't contribute anything, it may not be the right thing to be working on. So normally the way mob programming works, and I'm going to go way back to the beginning. Give me a moment here. And I'm going to try and go back to I'm going to go to this picture right here. It's not the beginning. But in this particular picture, we have all the skills and knowledge that we need. There are four coders, one, two, three, four, a database expert, a product owner, and a tester. Each one of us has a different skill set, and each one of us is looking when's the right thing to contribute on, when's the right time to contribute it, and what's the right way to contribute it. So this takes skill. It's just like in a basketball game. If you just stood there the whole time of the basketball game, you never caught the ball, you never threw it to anyone else, you never moved, you just stood there. That wouldn't be a very good basketball game for you to be in. But most basketball games, you're eventually going to have the ball. You're going to need to throw it to someone else or try to make a basket. This is the same kind of thing. So let's just say right now, what we're looking at, just an example, is we're going to do a list of the contributors to some activity that we're going to publish. Well, where are we going to find that? Well, the database person will say, oh, we've got that in a database table. And so we get it from there so that whenever we display this page, it will show who contributed to it. That'd be like something in Wikipedia. That data's got to be stored somewhere. And so same thing with everything we do. Then the person who's the programmer, a coder might say, oh yeah, well, here's how we get that data from the database. And someone else will say, the front end person might say, and here's how we're going to display it. So everybody has a different skill set here, and they're going to contribute the thing they're there to contribute. So we're not like 5 or 6 or 10 coders all working on the same thing. We have all the skills we need. This gives us a huge advantage. Now that's ideal. That's not common, but this is a picture of that ideal situation. We can go directly from start to finish and deploy it with the capabilities and skills and the rights that the people on this team have. The person who knows what we got to create is sitting with us. The person who knows how to get the data in and out of the database is sitting with us. The person who knows what we might need to test is sitting with us. So if we are doing this as an exercise, it might be different. But when we're doing actual work, we brought these people together because they have all the skills we need to do this work. If there's any duplicate skills, let's just make the example. If these two programmers knew exactly the same stuff, we might not need both of them. And one of them would say, I'm not really contributing much. I'm going to go work on something else for a while. Mob programming or software teaming doesn't replace solo work, but it gives us another way to work. But there is something new that I've been reading, I got exposed to about a year ago, and that is that we actually think better as a group if we learn to do that. And if that's true, as something I think I've seen, if we get really good at thinking as a group, then because we could pay attention for longer when we're in a dialogue than when we're solo. There's research that shows this, whether it's true or not. I don't trust research a lot, but I like that idea and I'm trying to internalize it. Did that help? Did that sort of answer what you were asking, David?
Yeah. I mean, it gets me down the road a bit enough to say, what do I want to think of next now that I know what you just said?
So I would offer this. I've done exercises with when I've been training people where we definitely need everybody's knowledge who's sitting there. And that starts showing us what collaboration really is about. It's like my father, I remember going up with my mother and father to a camp. The bunch of the churches in our area had bought some land and they were going to build some camp buildings. Well, all they need to do is make sure they've got a bunch of people that have the variety of skills you need to build something. And when we get there, they self-organize around the work. We don't need to have 10 roofers. We need one good roofer and a bunch of people who could follow directions of the good roofer. We have 10 people who don't need to know plumbing. One person needs to know plumbing. All we need to do is bring our skill forward, show the other people what they need to be doing right now. And that's an example of collaborative work. And I think I want to make this really clear. In my career, before I started working as a programmer, much of the work that I did involved a team. And then when I got into programming, I was assigned to work to sit and do separately. And it puzzled me because I was on a team. We were on a team and we were supposed to be working on certain things, but we never worked together. It was just that our work was related. Often the team is built up of people with the same skills. That's the database team. That's the testing team.
Right.
So we get put on a team, but we never really work as a team. You wouldn't create a soccer team or a football team, European football team with all goalies or just all forwards. You're going to have all the skills. You need all the skills. So that's sort of the overarching idea.
Mhm.
But we could always explore that some other time. That's a great thing to think about.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, any more questions or
Yes,
things to share?
you can tell I could go on and on and on. So it's probably a good time to call it a night for me. Oh, there's another hand. Let's take Rob's if we have the time.
Sure.
I've got all night.
Yeah, just
so-
a quick question about if you had any comment on how this fosters like cooperation instead of competition, both within a team as well as across teams.
So this has to do with learning to work well on a team. And one aspect of working well on a team is that I like to see is that any idea expressed is worth trying. And so if somebody says, "Oh, I think we could try this," and somebody says, "No, that won't work," we're already killing the ability to work as a team. Let's take it back to sports, just like basketball. If somebody throws the ball to me, I don't put my hands up and say, "Don't throw the ball to me." Like the ball got thrown to me, I better run with it, right? I have to take it and control it and do something. Now, in high school, the coach taught us this. Basketball is not a game of shooting baskets. Basketball is a game of passing the ball to someone else. If you get good at that, you'll get more chances of somebody on your team making a basket. I thought that's a pretty good thing, and that's kind of stuck with me. I don't know if it's true, but that's the way I think of it. So we actually have to be careful. It's not a competition. And if we try to prove how good we are, we're going to destroy the ability of the team to work as a team. We have to, I think it was Michael Jordan, he had a coach, Phil Jackson or something, I don't remember, a long time ago. Um, he said he learned from that coach that he's got to stop trying to be the star. He's got to make everyone else the star. That's a famous Michael Jordan story. And I'm not a big fan of basketball. I've watched it, but you get the idea. It's like that's what being on a team means. Let's make everybody the best they can be. And how do I help contribute to that? So the competition, it's not me, it's us. It's got to be us. We need to get good at working on a team. Matter of fact, I'd say that that's a prerequisite. So what are we going to do that? And we have to be more mindful of each other. We have to get good at listening. We have to get good at sharing our ideas. We have to get good at not insisting. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah. And avoid one of the things I've learned, avoid the heroes, hero worship and having
That's right.
heroes and stuff like that's just not
Yeah.
it's just not a thing to do. It's not going to
Yeah.
lead to collaboration. I'm sure we all have our own little axioms and
Yeah.
beliefs
I'm
that
fully on
feed into
board.
that.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Was that helpful, Rob? Did that sort of we definitely have that problem at
Yeah.
groupthink. We have groupthink is another issue. You have the idea of the wisdom of the crowd, but we also have the idea that, hey, I don't need to do anything because everybody else is doing it for me. And, there's a lot that's going to go wrong. So it requires that we be very mindful. Are we really collaborating? Or are we just riding along? Or are we pushy too much? Yeah, there's a lot to
Right.
this.
And it takes work, right? It takes practice.
Thank you for saying that. If you take any world-class sports team, they're going to spend a lot more time practicing than they are playing the game, whatever it is. Same with musicians. Same, my wife's an artist. She spends most of her time sketching. It's not doing the final work. It's doing the skills we need to have. Yeah,
Yep.
there's a lot to this. Yeah, thanks
Yeah,
for sharing
thanks.
about the artwork. Yes, that was I
Oh, yeah,
appreciate
sure.
that. So I wasn't too fast. Is that what you're telling me? I
Not
really
for me.
tried to rush through this thing to get it done in an hour.
we
I
can
thought,
we cram a lot into 1 hour, so apologies if it was too fast for anybody. The
I thought
recordings will be online. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I thought the pace was great.
Thank you. Thank you. I had to give this talk in 45 minutes once, so I had to cut a few slides to do it. But this one I kind of shaped for an hour, and it seemed to, I practiced it a few times. That's what I want to tell everybody here. I'm very awkward in front of people, and I practice trying to come across in a natural way. I'm not naturally that good at that. So this is not something I just do. I practice and practice and practice. So if you feel like you want to give talks, you can give talks.